Just under 2 miles from my home in the Vale of Glamorgan, South Wales, was a piece of graffiti on the side of the road. It was there for several years before being covered up. Scrawled in black paint was the Welsh phrase Cofiwch Tryweryn. This graffiti was not unique. All across Wales, similar messages can be found on walls and protest banners. In English, this translates to Remember Tryweryn, with Tryweryn being the name of the valley where the village of Capel was flooded in 1965 to create the Llyn Reservoir. A village in North Wales, Capel's fate was sealed after the passing of a private parliamentary bill brought forward by Liverpool City Council, who wanted the reservoir to provide the city with water. Not a single Welsh MP voted in favour of the bill, and yet it passed regardless, sparking a great outcry from Welsh nationalists and a subsequent re-examining of the relationship between Wales and England. The event is widely considered a significant factor in Wales's path to a devolution settlement due to tensions created in the 20th century, with the Senedd Cymru or Welsh Parliament being established in 1999, with the self-proclaimed aim of representing the interests of Wales and its people. While this in theory gives Wales the autonomy and power it needs to take control over its own affairs, there are many matters that remain non-devolved, such as the justice system, and compared to Northern Ireland and Scotland, Wales enjoys the lowest level of devolved power. There is still much contestation over devolution and its future. For example, the Internal Market Act of 2020 was designed to roll back the power devolved nations had over economic policy in the post-Brexit era. Thus today, for many Welsh nationalists, the need to remember Tryweryn and the unilateral action Parliament took against the nation is still as important as ever. While time may pass and graffiti may fade or be covered up, the slogan Cofiwch Tryweryn seems fated to reproduce itself for generations to come, fueled by memory and nationalist sentiment. A notable example here is that on the A487 in West Wales, which has been defaced and repainted over the years since its first appearance in 1965, reflecting the contested interpretations of Tryweryn's legacy and how it should be remembered. With the 60th anniversary of the opening of Llyn about a year away at the time of recording this video, it seems likely that there will be renewed interest in the Tryweryn case for years to come. However, given the number of decades since the event, combined with the fact that Capel was only home to about 75 people before it was flooded, the phenomena of prosthetic memory is a clear factor in Wales. Coined by Alison Landsberg, the concept of prosthetic memory refers to memories of a past through which people did not live. People can deeply connect with events they've never experienced, which can lead to the creation of mythology. What this video aims to investigate, then, is the relationship between Capel and memory, particularly living memory. With the number of people with first-hand memory of the flooding of Capel small to begin with and reducing as the decades pass, I wanted to use this project to preserve and examine the memory of some of the remaining primary witnesses of the event. In the summer of 2024, I visited Bala in North Wales, the closest town to Llyn. Many former pupils of the village's primary school, Ysgol Capel still live and work in the area, and I wanted to ask them about several key topics. Firstly, their memory of the event itself, then Liverpool's motive for bringing the bill forth, as well as how it changed their views on Welsh nationalism and where they laid the blame, whether on Liverpool City Council or England and Parliament more generally. Finally, I asked them to reflect on how the Tryweryn incident made them feel today, if any lessons can be learned, and if something like it could happen again. The implications of social memory are clear in their answers. Given the cohort's young ages at the time of the event, their memory is heavily informed by local and familial memory. This is not a criticism of their testimonies, but something important to keep in mind when watching. In many cases, it seems as though the feelings created by Tryweryn have had much more impact than some of the facts, something that Dr. Wyn Thomas, currently the most prominent scholar of this period of history, has spent much of his life researching.
It is a fascinating subject, and it's engaged me for years, and as much as anything, because there were these sort of branches. And you start off with the flooding of this valley, and it seems quite clear-cut, Wales against England 4. Then you get into the detail and find, well, actually it wasn't. Yes, it certainly was, opposition was felt across all the lines I mentioned, but then you get into the community. Well, what are the people being directly affected by this policy? How are they going to suffer or not? Then you discover that actually that's quite fragmented. It isn't a united opposition that I was led to believe it was.
I spoke with Wyn to establish the facts of the event before travelling to Bala to meet my interviewees.
It's 3 days before Christmas, really, in 1955, when Liverpool, through their banner headline in the Liverpool Daily Post, announced its intention to create a large reservoir near Bala. And this is the first time the residents who come to Reading are aware of this. There have been secret surveys undertaken in March of 1955, but these are just put down to general, geological surveys. There's not much to give rise to the idea that this is ending in a reservoir. But only sort of 6-7 months later, they're reading this then in their Liverpool Daily Post headline, 3 days before Christmas, which I mentioned in the conclusion of the book as not being ideal in terms of the timing of these things. So mistakes were made. You then have not much happening in Cwmtrerin over Christmas. I think there's a period of stunned silence almost, you could describe it as. The Tryweryn community then marched to Liverpool in November 1956, hence the discussion we had about Bessie Braddock. Some people claiming they were treated badly, people swearing at them, rotten tomatoes, that type of thing being thrown. Other people I spoke to said it was one of ambivalence and indifference. Nobody really knew why they were there. And then the bill starts to go through. It's submitted to Parliament on the 4th of December 1956. It's sponsored by Liverpool City Council. And then the judicial process begins. The first hearing is in January 1957. The crucial reading is the second reading, which occurs on the 3rd of July 1957. And it's passed with a majority of 49.
I spoke to 3 former students of Ysgol Capel Celyn in August of 2024. Dilys Evans and Rodri Jones, who I will be quoting throughout this video, were 4 years old when the families of Capel Celyn were forced to leave the village. Aaron Prosor Jones was 10 at the time. For most of the cohort, the memory of their last day at the school in Celyn, as well as leaving the village, has stayed with them. Rodri Jones also remembered this, recalling, "They cut down all the trees. Every twig, every branch was just cut and burned." The widespread use of compulsory purchase was facilitated by the fact that many farmers in the village rented land from the Rhywles estate, something I will return to later.
All this side of the valley was owned by Rhywles estate, you see. Well, once they had the nod from Rhywles estate, everybody that lived this side of the valley were tenants to the Rhywles estate. So if the landlord gave the nod, the tenants' clout wasn't very good, was it?
For Dilys, however, who was 4 when the school closed, recalling even basic details about the school building was difficult, and she acknowledged these limitations of memory herself.
People, I don't know if it's what I remember, but my sister and I have sort of discussed it, and she said, there was an old stove in the corner where they, used to put coal on them, and there was a guard around. But I personally don't remember that.
Many of those who set out to oppose the ambitions of Liverpool City Council soon found that municipal authorities were very keen on securing a reservoir in Capel Celyn specifically, likely due to the lower costs required. When making their compulsory purchases, Liverpool did so with knowledge the villagers lacked, thanks to visits from surveyors in prior months.
What created more bad feeling than anything was the underhanded way that everything, was pushed upon the valley. I think that's the buying the whole value on agricultural value to start with, knowing damn well that they had the resources. Land values at the time were pretty low, and the price they offered might have been, up to a realistic level, but as time went on, it was peanuts, really, wasn't it?
Rodri Jones also saw the agricultural valuations as unjust, stating that that's how they hoodwinked the people of the valley.
It was an ideal place, really. The real reason for doing that was they knew very well then that they had the resources from within the valley to build the dam.
Yeah.
And the dam, it was a cheap dam, really. That's the crux of the matter.
All the raw materials that are required can be found in the valley. So the transportation costs are therefore prevented, and that would have been exorbitant. So from Liverpool's point of view, it's ideal.
Here we begin to understand why tensions emerged in Capel as it became clear that Liverpool City Council were set on keeping the costs of building a reservoir as low as possible, even if it meant rejecting alternative suggestions from those in opposition.
The Welsh language is in decline. Rural depopulation in Wales is a problem. So they're sort of saying, but you're not helping this situation. And we can find you another valley where nobody lives, which won't affect anybody. And we will happily try, endeavour to find you a valley which will provide the amount of water you claim you need, even though we don't actually agree you need anywhere near as much as that. And as it turned out, Liverpool didn't. There was too much water, even by the time Clyn opened in October 1965. So everything that they'd anticipated as unnecessary was proved to be correct from a Welsh opposition perspective.
Rhodri also mentioned the apparent eagerness to flood Capel by Liverpool. They'd done their bloody homework, Liverpool. They really wanted this lake. It didn't cost them anything. The materials were already here. So, what was the impact of the flooding of Capel on Welsh politics, and particularly Welsh nationalism? The drowning of the valley, and especially the manner in which the bill was pushed through Parliament, invigorated Welsh nationalism and aggravated Anglo-Welsh relations. For many at the time, it was Liverpool City Council who were the main culprits of this incident, due to the fact that they brought the bill forth in Parliament.
And I think what riled people more than anything, that people from Liverpool and from London made the decision for Celyn.
To add insult to injury, it emerged later in the 20th century that the city had mostly been using its increased water supplies to sell on to industry, for profit, it seemed, rather than humanitarian needs.
It said initially that they wanted it for drinking water. Well, nobody begrudges anybody getting thirsty of water, but as developments and freedom of information came to public domain, it was found out that Liverpool was already oversubscribed with water from elsewhere, Lake Fernwy, for instance. And the whole point of creating this dam was to sell water to other councils that were short of water. Not given free, but sold.
So Wales as a unity are saying, well, why are we flooding one of our valleys and removing a Welsh-speaking community just so you can sell water to industry on Liverpool, and attract employment and all the rest of it?
In fact, many in the community questioned as to whether any water was used for its ostensible purpose.
What gets me is that Liverpool wanted that water, but from what I gather, but I can't be 100%, but I think it's quite. They've never used it. They sell it on.
It's easy to see why many believed Welsh resources were being exploited for financial gain. Parliament approved a bill to flood a rural village, regardless of Welsh opposition, and this resulted in a dam whose water is then transported across the border to an English city and then sold for profit.
They get the money for our water.
Rhodri Jones also dismissed the idea that there was a humanitarian element to the project in my interview with him, saying that the only people who profited were the water companies, and Liverpool City Council, of course. However, it is worth mentioning that part of Liverpool's justification for the sale of water was that the funds raised would themselves be used to fund its post-war regeneration project.
As I say, that any good historian will look at the reasons why Liverpool are undertaking this. And basically, 1945, as you will know, end of the war, massive regeneration program in Liverpool. Liverpool has been severely targeted by the Luftwaffe, principally because Liverpool is Britain's second most important city in terms of resources coming into Britain. So awful bomb damage anyway, not to mention the slum housing issue, which is absolutely appalling. In that context, it was a good idea. Of course it was, But should it have been done better? Was the water needed anyway? This is another question. 65 million gallons of water a day is taken from Capel Celyn, when in fact, even by the time Celyn is opened in October 1965, the population of Liverpool has decreased, and it's already decreased by the time the bill is being passed in Parliament. Also, this much heralded boom in industry, which they've promised as a way of creating employment on Merseyside, hasn't happened either. It did improve in the 60s, but not to the extent that Liverpool city councillors were anticipating. But I think another cause of resentment is really because they wanted the water to sell.
While the impact of the increased revenue for Liverpudlians is a topic beyond the scope of this project, it is important to keep the City Council's explanation in mind, as well as why, regardless of intentions, the flooding of Cwm Tryweryn would be perceived as an exercise of power by an English city. Liverpool MP Bessie Braddock and her husband John were often vilified for their role in the Capel Celyn case. A communist in her youth and a new MP voted in by the Labour landslide of 1945, Bessie Braddock fought to improve Liverpool's housing and find a solution to the problem of its slums. Therefore, it is clear to see why she might have backed the creation of a reservoir in Tryweryn, hopeful that it could facilitate an improvement in the quality of life for the city's working class. Many of the people I spoke to had their own perceptions of her character and politics, often informed by their upbringing and those around them. Rhodri Jones said, "It wasn't the actual people of Liverpool, it was the councillors, Bessie Braddock and her husband. They were supposed to be Labour people. They lied and they conned their way to get what they wanted."
Yeah, I think she was the one that carried the can, rightly or wrongly. At my age, I wouldn't be in a position to put judgment on her really, but she was the one that was targeted by a lot of people really.
I think there was a lady in Liverpool, wasn't she? Oh, well.
Braddock?
Yeah.
Bessie Braddock.
Yes. And I think if she came anywhere near, she would have been, I don't know what they would have done with her. She was quite an offensive woman. And I think if you speak, I don't know if you've spoken to some of them that went to Liverpool to protest, they were spat at, called every name under the sun.
Yeah. What Dilys refers to here is a protest by the people of Capel Celyn, as well as those in the local area, in Liverpool itself. This took place in 1956, while the bill to approve the flooding of the village was being debated and voted upon by the City Council. As is obvious now, this protest had little impact.
I'm sure it was a pretty naive protest really. There was fully backed from local community, and going with the coach to Liverpool at that time was a big novelty really, wasn't it? But as far as a clout was in question, it wouldn't have a clout at all, would it really? It's just a formality really, wasn't it?
The former Ysgol Capel Celyn pupils' perceptions of the people of Liverpool were also formed by oral, often familial history, as shown by Dilys's recollection of the protesters being shouted and spat at, a commonly held memory by the local community. While some alleged this hostile response, others instead noted a sense of apathy in response to the protests, an attitude of indifference, reflecting a lack of understanding of Wales. In 2005, 40 years after Capel Celyn was flooded, Liverpool City Council released an official apology, referring to the hurt of 40 years ago and apologising for insensitivity by their predecessor council. I asked the interviewees for their thoughts on the statement, now almost 20 years on.
The people that wanted that apology most went here to hear it, were they? That money couldn't just buy sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Aaron makes an important point. Talk of apologies today or compensation at the time of the event fails to recognise the human experience of the flooding and relocation.
This was really upsetting for the local people. I think we look at it so much in terms of themes of nationalism, or what this did for Plaid Cymru, or what this did for militancy. We can sometimes forget, that those local people, many of whom were not, politically minded, many of whom were, sort of living, pretty small, limited lives there, and were pretty content with that.
What about those people who farmed there for generations on good farms? And it's those people who say, well, they were heartbroken, to be honest. And a lot of them, people are dying. I think I got to something like 18 people from this community who died at a relatively young age because once they moved, they were dead within 2 or 3 years.
Ultimately, due to the time at which this project was undertaken, it is not possible to contact those former residents of Capel Celyn who would have been adults living and working in the village. All I am left with is the children of those people, who clearly remember the pain such disruption to their parents' lives inflicted. Rhodri Jones's family home was not directly drowned and was instead left as one of the few remaining properties on the edges of the new reservoir. He described the aftermath as a great strain on his parents, and that he was left with no community and no roots.
It was a very, very traumatic transformation of life for them, isn't it? Seeing what you'd looked at all your life just turn into turmoil and turned into a crater, really, isn't it? Yeah. In a matter of weeks. Those people would have suffered traumatically and health-wise, I'm sure they would. If it happened now, I'm sure there'd be a lot of looking into trauma and things like that, isn't it?
Therefore today, only those who were children at the time can still provide first-hand testimonies via memory, beginning the chain of oral history.
But they're not here to tell you the story, are they? But I'm sure a lot went lost sort of 20 years, 30 years maybe of life because of the scars created with what happened, isn't it?
As mentioned at the beginning of this video, the 60th anniversary of the opening of Llyn Celyn will be on the 28th of October 2025. Media interest in the event will surely reignite, and undoubtedly discussions and debate around where the Welsh nation has come since will take place. Many will reflect upon the changes in Welsh autonomy compared to that first reading of the Tryweryn Reservoir Bill in 1957.
We emerge as a nation more confident as a result of what happened at Cwm Tryweryn.
I think because of the Welsh have become more proud of who they are. And, we've got our Senedd now, haven't we?
For a nation, as a Welsh nation, I think we've forfeited this valley to awake a nation for what could be even more serious consequences.
It seems a natural question to ask if something like this could happen again today, given the establishment of devolved government and the contentious history of Tryweryn itself.
Yeah, I do say, and maybe I say it quite bluntly, that would never ever happen again. Because, I think it was done so underhand. They came and they did like surveys, didn't tell anybody, and nothing was known about it until it was fait accompli. It was there, ready to go.
Rhodri Jones made the connection between the Tryweryn case and a similar situation today with HS2. Similar at least due to the way that England maintains its dominance over Wales in matters of public infrastructure. For context, the UK government's high-speed rail project has been designated as an England and Wales scheme, which means that the Welsh government does not receive compensation via the Barnett formula, a mechanism used to even out public spending across the devolved nations. They will do it again. Celyn is a reflection of the way governments take what they want. If they want to build HS2, they will do it. Governments and the powers that be can do and take what they want. They'll give you some money for it, but it doesn't matter how many people protest. They'll bring the security in and they'll do what they want. Aaron pointed to changes in society and distrust in the government, believing that something to the scale of Tryweryn could not be repeated.
I doubt it very much.
And why do you think that?
well, a lot of things have changed over 50 years' time, and attitudes have changed, and people tend to be aware of things a lot quicker than they were back at that time. Well, there's a lot more minuses than pluses, isn't there? You know, I don't know how it looks on their books now, but I'm sure of one thing: they wouldn't like to do another one.
It seems that for 2 out of the 3 people I interviewed, the metaphorical black mark of Tryweryn against England would be enough to dissuade central government from making a repeated mistake.
Could it happen now? Not in the same way. I think, the word Tryweryn now, it's so emotive for many people. Many people don't know the history, really. They haven't read about it, but they sort of sense it's a word that now represents exploitation and oppression. And I think any sort of similar scheme now, would sort of be opposed. I don't think it would happen in the same way now. Because there's lots of clamour for more control in Wales over water resources.
So, where does Wales go from here? And are there any lessons, if any, to be learned?
Well, I think the lesson I've learned is the biggest lesson I've learned out of it is never believe a politician, and look into a hidden agenda all the time. That's what I've learned out of it. The big phrase they used to have was, don't worry, your homes will be saved. But as time went on, you grow older, you seem to have a thought at the back of your mind, these people are bullshitting, really, isn't it?
Look more into things. Don't take face value.
Yeah.
Don't just accept things for what they are. Look into things a lot more. Yes, Liverpool wanted water. They needed that water to service the people. But the fact that they could come into a Welsh community and say, we're drowning your village, you can't point a finger at anybody, can you? It's a collective thing, isn't it? It's the fact that Liverpool wanted water. They could make a decision about it in Parliament, and it was fait accompli for here. So you can't. I don't think I'm able to point a finger at anybody.
Well, what's done is done, isn't it? You can't turn the clock back. That's a fact. And there's no point taking anger into your remit, really, is it? The only thing that's I don't know whether it annoys me or whatever you'd call it, but is to know after time that the whole thing wasn't really wanted, isn't it? This area's given a lot up. A fun thing, really, isn't it?
And in the modern day, how should the nation move on from the memory of Tryweryn?
Sometimes I think, some people want to talk about it and, sort of, yes, it was wrong what happened, but it's done, isn't it? We can't change it. So try not to harp on about it.
Right.
my thing, my own thing is that sometimes I don't want to talk about it. It's happened, and I can't change it.
Yeah.
But I would struggle to think that it would ever happen again.
I don't think a lot of people will ever move on from Tryweryn. I think it's sort of mythology, and I do believe there's a lot of mythologizing around Tryweryn. Is actually augmenting, not necessarily in the local area, but in terms of the broader field of Welsh nationalism.
And who, if anyone, won from the flooding of Capel Celyn?
Well, I don't know where they're winners.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I don't know who the winners would be.
Rhodri Jones shared a similar sentiment. I can tell you one thing, it's not this area. I can't tell you who gained, but I can tell you who hasn't. However, it is worth remembering that in the local area there may have been one prominent group that gained something from the whole affair. Acting as landlord for many of the farmers of the valley, the Rhulas estate would have received considerable compensation for its land when put under compulsory purchase by Liverpool City Council.
If anybody got the cream out of the job, it was Rhulas estate. There's no doubt about it.
While Capel Celyn was a relatively small village of less than 100 people, it is clear from my interviews that a utilitarian approach to the incident, favouring Liverpool's hundreds of thousands of citizens, is not exactly a satisfactory one for those who had to suffer through it. While the gains of the Llyn Celyn Reservoir are contested and debatable, the losses from its construction are less so. Liverpool City Council, along with Parliament, played a role in the dispersal of a rural Welsh community from their home, and the creation of a deep, long-lasting wound in the national memory, one that Wales may eventually forgive, but not forget. In the 21st century, as living memory dwindles, it seems that the case of Capel Celyn may have the greatest value when looking forwards, when examining Wales's position in the United Kingdom, as well as in matters of public infrastructure, particularly water, given the era of climate change. The call to remember Tryweryn remains as strong as ever. It remains a cautionary tale of the use of power by municipalities over rural communities, and it is still evoked in contemporary debates around Welsh nationalism and the rights of local communities against national infrastructure projects, particularly the current topic of HS2.